should just be the little red button down below here. Alt R.
Got it.
Oh, there it goes.
Cool. We are recording. Thank you, Jason, for taking this
You're very
time.
welcome, Victoria.
Okay. So basically what we'll do is we'll just go through some formal questions. There's about 13 in total. And if you have anything that you want to add or you think is pertinent, feel free to volunteer it at any point. But we're just going to kind of zoom through these. And the main thing is if something like doesn't pertain or, you know, you don't have an answer that really fits with the question, feel free to say that, like, and say whatever you think. But does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. All right. So I think I sent the questions to you ahead of time, but I have got them pulled up here, so I'll just kind of work from them. All right. So first question, how did your role of project manager come about with your current job?
Well, the current job, it was part of the job description. So it was part of the requirements that I had, that this role has some project management experience. So it was already kind of baked in, and the level of expectation, I think it varied based upon what the candidates had in terms of how overall important it was, I suspect. With my background and where I started from and where I came, I seem to have a lot of that in various different platforms and things. Large projects, small projects, medium projects, all different roles.
And how did your formal education prepare you for being a project manager?
I had to think about that question, and as far as I can remember, I'd like to say it was a huge benefit, but I do not remember any project management courses or materials throughout my education, my formal education. A lot of my project management experience from school, if you want to call it project management, was more of the, shall we say, be tossed on a team and good luck. So trial and error, where you figure out how to navigate conflict on your own, how to figure out task assignments and delegations on your own. What do you do when teammates don't do their portion of the projects? So I wouldn't say it was actually anything formal. It was more of good luck and figure it out for yourselves. I don't remember any of the faculty or professors, I should say, dealing with when there are problems. I remember teams saying, hey, that's your team, figure it out.
Yeah. And was that, I know you have your MBA, was it more so in your master's program that would happen? Or did you not, or under both?
The undergraduate. In the master's program, there were a lot more professionals in that program. So I tended to work more closely with a lot of professionals whose time was important to them. So after working 40 hours a week, they have families, they have a graduate program. Time management to these individuals was critical. So it worked in my favor to kind of work with them and kind of learn from how they're dealing with that aspect of their life, because juggling that many things, that's time consuming. Yeah. But undergraduates where I saw the most problems with, not problems, challenges with project management. It wasn't part of the curriculum.
Right. Makes sense. Cool. All right. So next question, what do you wish would have been included in your formal education to prepare you for being a project manager?
Another tough question, actually. I'm sure things have changed since I went through school. I guess taking things that I know now, looking back, I think, because project management is something that we all do in our professional careers in some way, shape, or form, while you're probably never called a project manager most of the time, having that core skill, a course, something modeled after from the PMI Institute would be a good thing, maybe along the CAP-M level, which is the first certification level, just to get people familiar with how do you recognize a project, what are some of the standard roles you might be doing, because it could be, projects are really anything. That might have been helpful. With modern technologies, maybe there's even simulators out there where you can kind of go through would it be like to have to deal with a project and when plans don't go correctly. I
Right.
remember from business simulation classes, there were at that time programs that ran business simulations or make decisions, computers run, and you get results. So maybe there are things out there today, but a baseline course to help people understand the basic roles, I think, would be beneficial,
That makes sense.
especially the amount of group work that I think still goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even though my master's isn't in project management, I feel like having this course and this lens to kind of think about developing training programs has already been beneficial to me. And they're like change management. I did a change management course last year or last semester.
Mhm.
And there's so many similarities between change management and project management, and a lot of the same like foundational skills like um, well, conflict resolution, communication being like the central plug that kind of holds it all together. So it's been very beneficial that so far.
When I started my career as a systems implementer, there were people in the firm, that's what they did, change management. That
Yeah,
was their skill set. They came in and helped with organizational changes, whether it's the main systems that we were bringing in, they work in parallel, or with other initiatives that the company was going through. They bring in just those individuals, help them through those massive changes.
right.
Um, so yeah, that's interesting you had a class like that. That'd have been very handy to have early on.
Well, it made me realize, working with you, how important it is to have buy-in from Jeff, how important it is to have the subject matter experts, how important it is to have the subject matter experts, sometimes myself, sometimes someone else, or whoever the subject matter expert is, depending on what you're doing, how important it is to have them be cooperative and engaged. And then obviously the stakeholders, it's not just me, it's not just Karen, it's like all the people that are going to actually end up doing the work. Which is why I think it was so important we did that training with you where you kind of introduced the concept to the team
Oh, yeah.
early on, or you know what I mean, involving you based on the materials you built for your team. But anyways, I digress.
No, that's a very good example. But you're right, though. Most projects are structured around some type of sponsor. There's a project manager. There's functional experts, technical experts, change experts. If you're having that type of skill sets, those are in my experiences, those are pretty common roles to have for
Yeah,
larger projects. Smaller projects, typically, you might have people playing wearing multiple hats. A
right.
lot of times, I am the project manager, quote unquote, as well as a functional expert and then
Exactly.
I'm also a technical expert. I like those projects. I can make all the decisions for myself.
Yeah, that's
I hope they're
best. Okay, cool. So next up is, what are some of the challenges you face as a project manager?
mm-hmm. This won't get me in trouble, will it? No.
No.
I think some of the most common ones is scope creep. It's scope creep is probably in my experience, is one of the most difficult things to manage as well. Because scope creep comes from so many different directions. And if you don't really have a clear understanding of where you're going and how you're getting there, you may find yourself adding a lot more wonderful features and functions to something, but you're never going to make the deadlines and budget restraints that you probably have in place.
Right.
From in my experiences, scope creep will come from, like I said, above you, senior level management. Your sponsor might have ideas. Your functional team, technical team may go, hey, this is a great idea, and go down a path. And why I always want to encourage experimentation and piloting. And hey, what if we do it this way versus that way? Sometimes you have to kind of be watchful of what that means, or can you table that later? How do you negotiate that process? So scope keep is probably one of the things that consistently through my career you have to be very much on top of. It's easy to say yes, sure, one thing, two things, three things, and you're 15 things into the thing, you still haven't released the first iteration of the solution.
Yeah, I mean, we even encountered that when we worked together with
Mm-hmm.
the
And sometimes different methodologies might help with that managing that. So I'm moving more towards an agile framework for us, at least for my purposes, so that iterations come through deliverables are being done in 2 or 3 week sprints, so you have to see some progress. So hopefully a scoop creep comes up. Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's add it to the board. It's not
Yeah,
going to impact what we're trying to sprint out right now, so that it gets added, everyone gets heard, we can vet it and say, yeah, it's a great idea. Where does it fit? What's the value? And then put it on the roadmap rather than doing a more of a big bang or waterfall approach where you start adding all these features, it just keeps pushing that first phase further and further off.
that makes sense. A lot of sense. Yeah, scope creep seems to be the problem child of getting things done, even like in terms of like the engagement thing. We had this meeting with Brian Sisko and Jim Brochart yesterday, day before yesterday. And this was the first time they had seen the engagement score like in Tableau and interacted with it. And, you know, they were asking things that were so much outside the realm of like what the group that was, you know, tasked with kind of choosing the model and choosing the data and figuring it all out. And it's just so easy to see, like, because they weren't brought in and from the beginning, or even though they technically were, like even seeing that, it's like it just gets so overwhelming because, anyways.
No, it's probably a very good example of that. Also reminds me of some of the buy-in in terms of when you have sponsors engaging the sponsors, so they're in part of the project too. They may not get into all the details that the team's getting involved with, but to have that visibility in terms of understanding some of the major broader aspects of the project and how it could impact could be beneficial too. But
Yeah.
that may also introduce other challenges.
Right. And also, I just need to learn how to develop language about like how to respond to that. Like, absolutely, but that was not, I mean, it sounds so simple. Like, that wasn't the focus of the group, or that wasn't, but in the moment, it's hard to come up with those words. But
I
anywho,
find that sometimes the conversation at that level gets more interesting because they ask questions that you because of their scope and some of the broader knowledges they have of some of all the facets of the business, they start asking questions like, I never thought of it that way. Or that is an interesting way of taking that information and going and looking at it differently. Or how would that apply to whatever the question may be? It may generate great new ideas. How do we embed that into the next generation?
yeah, exactly. Next iteration. And so that sort of kind of is in line with the whole agile methodology as well, I would think, is like put it down. Let's not unpack it right this second. Or if we do unpack it, like it's not going to keep us from moving forward with this little chunk, I guess. I don't know. But
It can. I'm going to totally not define agile properly because I haven't used it in so long. But essentially, is yeah, it's for me. It's about looking at all the different use cases or user stories that they call them, I believe, scenarios, whatever terminology you want to use, and trying to figure out how to build these features and functions that create value for those users. It's not about getting into the specifics of how to make it, that comes later, but if the idea is that I want to embed, how, I can think of an good example for that one, but if there was a need or a scenario of how to use the data, how do we make it happen?
right.
That could be a sprint or a series of sprints to make that deliverable happen for that group of users. Yeah, I'm definitely not using the terms properly.
No, I think you are. Okay.
Yeah, the idea of very short iterations is so you're always building so I can show you and some of our project, here's where we are. Like I did Monday, so here's where I am with our project. So you get a little sample, and I want to do it again when I'm at a certain point. I thought it'd be a lot longer, but here's another piece. Here's chat. Here is reporting, at least what I can think for reporting. Here is how telephone might work. So you can get a little flavor of seeing the thing kind of materialize as time progresses, not wait 6 weeks, 8 weeks for the end result.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to using, since scope creep for me is one of my biggest concerns, is how do I prevent that, is show you quicker iterations of what we're trying to do so that we can pivot and adjust, because maybe that scope creep isn't scope creep, but an adjustment to a business need that was just identified because of the progress we made.
Right. Or a misunderstanding of a need or whatever.
Which is a very common thing with requirements.
Yeah. Which is my understanding from what I've read in my textbooks. That is exactly what agile is. I mean, without us being too jargony. I mean, that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of it. So that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, that's how I look at it as well. Is let's have continuous communications and continuous improvement to make things better, so that we can get to the solution that you're looking for, but not wait 6 months, 12 months.
Yeah, and go down a path that may or may not be, the exact right path for the collective group or whatever.
There's also as a way to evaluate, is this project worth continuing?
Right.
Better to find out 4 weeks than it is 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So on that same note, the next couple of questions are actually about scope. So this will kind of be right in the vein of what we're talking about. So the next question is, in what ways do you document the scope of a project?
Well, my team makes fun of me. I because I typically have earlier in my life, it was pretty much just waterfall methodologies that we used, some rapid methodologies, and documentation was drilled into me in my very day one. As a former consultant, and that's what I started as, that is what you do. You document so the clients have documentation to show what you actually did, what the decisions were. Now, I don't do that level of documentation anymore because I would never get anything accomplished by myself in that regard.
Yeah.
So a lot of my documentation now focuses on a combination of PowerPoint slides, which I use to facilitate conversations. I think you've seen some of those in terms of I have a few slides that help articulate whatever the talking points are going to be to get some collaboration, some feedback. Does this make sense? Maybe do some screenshots of what it could look like we're trying to drive to, or a process map to say, is this how the flow works?
Right.
So that I use that heavily with what I'll call the end user communications, because trying to collaborate, trying to get yes. I don't get into sign off documents anymore. That's just you never get signatures anyways, and things will change. On the flip side of things, when I work with our technical programming team, this is where my team does make fun of me, because it is not uncommon for me to have a 7 or 10 page specification document. Based on those conversations, I start looking at how data needs to be driven, or what are some of the SQL that should be looked at, what tables and data, if it's a data transformation, how are we going to transform those data? So I spell that all out in more of not a programming structure. I let the programmers write what they want, but basically terminology so they can follow where the data and fields come here. This is what we want to apply to it. This is what the end result would be. So the input, the process, and the output, wherever I can. And that seems to work very well for them, because they can see the business logic that you and I will talk about. And now I'm talking that in their terminology to help them understand, well, this table, this view, this function, this is how we want to get to that end result.
Right.
Those are the two primary documents I use is a PowerPoint or slides in some cases for collaboration purposes with the users, and then I write specifications on for the end users. And of course, you've seen train documentation, similar kind of idea there. And of course, there's usually a project plan. I say usually because I've gotten out of practice of there, because most people won't look at it.
What about, so when you say specification document, would you sort of compare that to like a resources document, or sort of like a project plan? Or I guess the specifications would be a part of a project plan, right?
A project plan is not part of specification. The project plan would essentially be the tasks, resources, and time, generically speaking, that are needed in the structure to accomplish from start to end to get your results.
Okay.
In level detail, it varies. What I'm referring to as a specification is a document that contains programming logic, shall we say.
Sort of like a roadmap for programming?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you have a calculation that you want part of a report, that's a good example I'm thinking in my head. And how do you determine whether or not that code is active? So it has a start and end date, and today's date is whatever it is. I don't know the date, unfortunately. They all blend together. The great for a project manager to say, I don't know what date it is. Is it effective if you give you a prompt in the report and say, well, I want to know everything as of 6/30/2020, sorry, yeah, 2020, we need to look and say, well, here's how you determine what two fields and that's the logic that goes into, hey, is this thing active or inactive based upon the date you provided as a user in the report?
Gotcha.
That is more along the specifications. That also could involve form layouts if we're doing user, I have the acronym in my head, but I can't think the term suddenly. Basically, user experiences for form designs or for advanced forms or for web application or something, if we do the frames and stuff, how it could potentially look, what kind of features and functions, all of that would be part of a specification document. Or at least a skeleton of such, because one is, I don't want to go too far with those because it's going to change. Once the user starts seeing it, they're going to move things around. So how do we get a working design up, knowing that it's going to change? So that's all specifications, at least for what I do here.
Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
There's nothing in my paper that probably needs to be addressed by that. I was just curious about the specifications.
Oh, and another one would be Visio. I'm very much into Visio in terms of data process flows.
That's right. Visio is your baby.
Oh, I love Visio. I was just putting a presentation together for tomorrow. It has Visio embedded in one of the slides.
Yeah. All right, the next one is, again, along the same vein. So how do you actually handle scope creep?
Gently, sometimes. A lot of it comes down to hearing what it is and not necessarily saying no. Some people have a philosophy of you never can say no, but when it comes to scope creep, you have to assess, is that going to be beneficial to what the objectives are for whatever you're about to release? Can it be tabled? So it's a lot of negotiations, communications, or I guess I'd say there in terms of what is this, how is this going to create value? Where does it need to provide value? Is it even part of what's being built right now, or are you trying to put something in that is for later? In which case, it's not necessarily a scope creep, but it may impact the future effort that goes on.
Right.
In my experience with the traditional approach of project management, that becomes very scary because you have everything planned out.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to impact your plan in some way. Usually it does. And then if it's more of an agile approach, then it may simply be an enhancement feature or another use case for a feature phase, feature sprint.
Yeah.
So, okay, it's added to the list of things that need to be built. But yeah, so if it's truly a scope creep, it's a lot of it's going to be talking about negotiating, figuring out scheduling of that. How do you handle that? And also the source also matters sometimes too.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're told that you don't get a choice. You have to put this in. Okay, we'll make it work. We'll figure it out. We'll pull something else out to make room for it.
Yeah, and I guess like if there are budgetary, or I guess deadline implications, you just have to clearly communicate that and get buy-in from your sponsors and sign off on like, okay, well, if you want this, it's going to be another potentially month, 2 months, 3 months, and there's cost associated with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you start project in the traditional sense, when I put project manager or whoever is kind of facilitating that role per se, needs to make sure that one, the entire team's up to speed of what's going through, what's happening, as well as if you start seeing some of those things, you have to start, letting the project sponsor know, because that person is your advocate. They were the ones who are supposed to really be able to navigate the organizational culture to say, hey, I get it. Let me go talk to them a little bit. Maybe they can help smooth things out if you really do have to say no for something. So yeah, so it's a delicate balance sometimes. I do always try to listen and try to see what it is and how valuable it is, and try to put it on the roadmap someplace. I do try to not put it into scope creep if I can.
Cool. So, what are some examples of ways you have successfully mitigated project risk or risks?
Well, a big part of that is I try to do piloting first, pilot concepts. Is it feasible? Is this something that would work for that unit in which the solution is being built for? So if the idea is coming from, let's say, your team, then, well, I want to listen and understand kind of how that, what do you envision? So paint me, what I always say, paint me a picture. Draw me a
Yeah.
napkin on the whiteboard. Just articulate what you're trying to do. Let's talk through it. Help me understand your business better so I can help facilitate what you need.
Yeah.
If it's coming from my end of the house and say, hey, came across a really cool idea, what do you think? Then a lot of times I'll throw the idea on the table and say, hey, what do you think? Or I might invoke a pilot where I go build something to see if it's even possible to say, hey, here's a pretty neat idea. Would this be of benefit to you? I think it would be for these reasons. And then what do you say? If you
Yeah.
say, nope, don't see a value in that at all. Okay, thanks.
Right.
Nothing gained, and the pilot gets put off the side. But piloting gives you a good way to kind of really see what it's going to take to make something happen.
Yeah.
Another piece is obviously my documentation. That's one way I mitigate risk. The PowerPoint slides, because I want a conversation. I'm not going to say there won't be miscommunications or scope creep issues or things. It's just a helpful way to kind of really drive the risk of finding during these short development windows that we're understanding what we're developing correctly. It can change, it can morph, that's fine, but we don't want to release something and say, oh, that's totally wrong. But where do we go off? And another piece of that is finding the right team. Knowing that you don't always need 30 people on a team. Sometimes a small agile, loosely defined term, agile teams are the best ones. You only
Yeah.
need certain individuals who can really do that and then trust them to delegate to their own people to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. I find that sometimes to be the better way of approaching that because if in your world, you know your world. I don't. I know enough of it, probably be dangerous. But you know your team, you know, and their team members know the details ins and outs as well. So there's a lot that can be accomplished by doing that as well.
Right.
Those are some methods I use to mitigate risks. I try to also identify organizational risks up front, especially with newer projects, such as maybe we're bringing in some new software. Okay, so how does the team that this is supposed to support, what is our current assessment of their ability to handle whatever this thing is going to do?
Right.
What level of training? Are they comfortable with computers? Are they not comfortable with computers? Do we have the wide spectrum? I'm going back to my early days where that was a major concern. We have people who were very used to computers, others who wouldn't touch one to save their lives. So you always deal with a lot of different things. So those are some ideas. Identify that and know that you have to do extra training.
Right.
You know, you're changing processes. Well, at a certain point, it's better to bring in those people to talk to them, show them what's coming. So the sudden shock is not there at training day, but it actually did that with your team. We kind of showed them what was coming, got some input, got some feedback from them, made some adjustments, I believe, in terms of that feedback and said, okay, this is, we heard it, what about now? And you might have to do that a couple of times, but that will help with the adoption and rollout later on if it is a significant change. And our project review was a significant change.
Exactly. Getting their buy-in or at least their comfort and familiarity with the change so that they're more likely to be able to do it successfully without, too many hiccups or outright, I don't know, rejection, which does happen. Less likely in our world because it happens. But I think that
happen even with team members doing things to systems to cause problems with the project.
yes, and I think about development folks.
Entire life.
Yeah, I think of development folks and their role with not Blackbaud, but is it Black?
It is Blackbaud
Yeah.
FPM.
Yeah, their comfort level with it, their interest in using it. I don't know if things have I think things have basically improved and that people are using it. But I know that at first, like, people were not putting their contact reports, and they wanted Margaret's team to do all the mass things, and there were some hiccups there for a while.
Yes, that platform does allow for bulk loading, which is something on the prospect development team for various situations. But yeah, so the frontline fundraisers are, as far as I know, they're not able to enter contact reports reports in advance directly. They must, because they have licenses to the FPM, they work in there. They still use advance for other things. They might have support teams to load their own mass loads for them through Blackbaud or through advance if they don't have Blackbaud. But yeah, so all that stuff, as far as I'm aware, has been resolved.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so what is some advice you can offer for preparing for and successfully managing collaboration on a project?
It sort of depends upon the projects, the organizational culture, but typically speaking, how I approach it is I go in with a game plan. It depends on what role I'm in, but lately, because I'm driving some changes, I go in with a game plan.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I have a preset agenda that it's going to be this way. Is I find that when you're approaching a team with a new idea, or maybe they've requested an idea, say, hey, I want to do something with exclusions, or actually, for given I'm working with appeal analysis, is I go in with, I've heard you, I've listened to the conversations, based on the information you gave me, here is what I'm thinking. And which again, goes back to my PowerPoint slides, or slides in general, is here's what I think I've heard.
Yeah.
This is where I think you're trying to go with something like this. If this is correct, it's an open conversation. It's not me presenting something necessarily. I'm using the slides as a facilitation tool. I could be totally wrong. Okay, throw it away. Let me rehear you again. My mistake, let me hear, and get that input as part of that process. So that's one of the approaches. That's probably one of the most common approaches I've done, and I've noticed that Jeff has now done that too. Now he's starting to use slides now, some of his meetings, to help facilitate that. So I assume he picked up on some of those, because I was doing the same thing to them, and say, well, here's what we're talking about. It creates that framework, that illustration, because I've noticed in my years, and I took a long time to pick up on this, is how I learn and how other people's learn are very different.
Right.
More of a hands-on, I do the job, that's how I learn. Reading a book is not going to really educate me. I'll use a book for reference.
Yeah.
We need the thing to play with, and that's how I learn. So I've learned that people are visual learners, they're auditorial learners, or I think their term is kinetic learners. I could be totally wrong with terms.
No, you're right.
I thought there's a fourth one too.
There is. But it's like a term that's not very intuitive. I think there's but you hit on the main ones.
and that's amazing. That was actually a corporate training program I went through many years ago. I actually listened. I learned something from that corporate training session. So using the slides, I had the visual, which allows me to focus the conversation. And that's really what I'm trying to do in collaboration, is I'm trying to focus the conversation so it stays within a certain box, if you will, or at least the ballpark. Right. If someone is not facilitating in some way, the conversation can go in a whole bunch of different directions that may not be necessary at that time, or maybe it does go because of the idea wasn't a good one, or it needs to be vetted out further.
And a lot of times when I agree, like I think I've noticed that Jeff has like kind of picked up on that, and I think even I have picked up on that and do that with some of my meetings. It's not that you have an agenda, it's that you go in informed, you've done your background, you've done your research. As you said, you've actively listened to the needs, considered those needs, troubleshot, you know what I mean? Troubleshooted those needs.
Looked into,
that's better.
While I work in the back office.
So essentially you've thought about it critically enough to go in informed, so that when someone asks a random question about like, well, can it do this? Or do you know this? You're not necessarily going to know the answer to every question, but you'll be able to make basically informed, basically you're
informed or slightly educated guesses in terms of what it can do.
Yeah.
Because you don't always know the answer. Like, well, it seems reasonable that we could probably do that.
Yeah.
We'll add it to the list.
And of course, sometimes you do just know the answer because of the vetting process that you have that you utilize and things like that, which makes it even more beneficial to the conversation. Because a lot of times I notice in these meetings I go to as a bystander or as a listener, there's no action items. Nothing comes of the meeting other than the fact that the meeting occurs. And so, but anywho, that makes sense.
Well, that's something, even as I have to remember to make sure I do that. It's just, is especially in collaboration meetings and that's okay. Actually, maybe in collaboration meetings, that's okay. Because what you're trying to do is you're just trying to listen and see if you're on the right track. That's
Yeah.
the goal of the next meeting, not today, but tomorrow, is here's what I've heard. Am I on the right track? Is this fitting into your vision of what you were trying to accomplish? How big of a gap is there? Is it big? Is it small? Are we already lined up perfectly? Okay, let's move forward if we're all on board. And that requires the ability to recognize that your ideas are not always the right. And
Right.
you have to pivot and flex and go, oh, do you like any of these ideas? Okay, so, all right, so what do you have in mind? And showing that you are responsive.
Yeah.
Or if there are fatal flaws with it, okay, identify that. But I've also noticed in collaboration that everybody is able to collaborate at that moment.
Yeah. There's not
That's
always
the first
action
thing.
items. Sometimes it really is just a dialogue, and that's part of the whole process, I guess.
Well, some people I find, and I'm one of those individuals, if I was just asked to attend a meeting to participate, wow, terrible English. If I'm not well versed on that subject, I may need time to listen, digest what you're saying, go back to my office, think about it, maybe do some Google searches, play with the system a little bit, since that's what all the systems, think through it and go, okay, if you do that, then A equals B, then B equals C, then C equals D. Well, why do we need B and C? Why can't I go from A to D? And I start thinking it, but differently. So I also have to recognize in the collaborations that not everyone participates. That means they're not listening, they're not digesting. They may need time to process that and go, no, that's not right, Jason. I think we need to keep B and C in place because of what it's going to do for me for these reasons. Oh, great, perfect. Didn't know that. I don't know your business. You do. Help. I want to learn your business as much as you want to learn whatever thing that we're working on.
Right.
Yep. And those are the fun times. I enjoy the collaboration sessions.
Yeah.
You know me. I have my white markers, my own eraser, and I'm ready to go. All right, sit down, Jason. Fine.
Great. I know. I miss the whiteboard sessions.
It seemed like all I need is a laptop and a whiteboard. Other than that, I'm good. So they give me a laptop and a whiteboard in my office. I'm
That's
good.
what
That's all I need.
taken away from us. Whiteboards.
You can do it in Zoom.
That's true.
I've actually used it.
Oh, cool. I haven't yet. I need to get on that.
Love it.
Okay.
I don't know how to try to save it though. It was a throwaway, so it was perfectly fine.
You can save it though?
I think you can. In this case, I haven't needed to, so I should probably look into that because eventually I'm going to be hit like, oh, I need to save that. How do I do that now?
I guess you can do a screenshot, but.
True. I do have the Snagit software, so I can actually do it that way.
Yeah. Okay, next question. What advice would you give someone entering the field, I guess the field of project management, on lessons learned with regards to managing projects? I guess lessons learned from your experience with project management to someone that's just sort of starting out.
This is the advice that I got. So is it a lesson learned? It proved to be a lesson learned. He had a much elegant way of saying it back then, so I won't do it justice. It kind of fits in two things. Projects are going to fail. Be prepared. Embrace it. Nothing's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
As soon as you write that plan, it's going to change.
Yeah.
You want to avoid major project failures, but just be aware that things are going to go wrong, and that's in the role you play on a project. You have to be able to adjust, flex, contract, open mind, adjust, and that's just the nature of it. Don't try to make it fit into this thing that it's not going to fit. Now, obviously, you don't want to go over time. You don't want to go over budget. You do have constraints placed on projects. You have only so many resources. And while we do everything we do to mitigate those risks, there are going to be projects that are going to fail. Learn from them.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I had that, because I think that corrected some of my behaviors early in my career, where when you're learning out, you're making mistakes, honest mistakes. You're not planning properly. You're not documenting. You're not delegating. You're learning how to get it, how to deal with the projects you're working on, either a team member or as your first project, and not be aware that there's going to be problems. Learn from them.
Yeah.
He had a much better way of phrasing that, but that's kind of what I learned from him, his advice, and learning throughout my career. Is like, even today, even now, one of the first projects we had here it was successful, but at the executive office level, basically said, this isn't going to work. I said, I know. I can already tell. So let's shut it down. No problem. We're really sorry, but you did all this great work. Like, I'm not offended.
Yeah. And you were skilled enough and a professional enough to maybe understand, I don't know what the context is, but to say like, yeah, this happens sometimes. That's one of the first things I read in my current textbook, is that you have all these skilled project managers and these budgets and these resources, but apparently most projects fail,
mm-hmm.
Which I was surprised to read.
I remember some kind of statistic out there. I don't remember what it is anymore, but yeah, there's a high. I typically follow the software industry, but when I first started working on CRM projects years ago, it was an astronomical percentage of failure. I'm like, do we really want this project? I mean, look at the industry. There is like way over 50%, I think it was. It's like, I don't know. I mean, why?
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just, well, projects are tough.
Yeah.
Projects are challenging.
Yeah, and I say fail, but I think the idea or the nuance there in the textbook, if I remember correctly, and this was like, months ago, was basically that it's failure in terms of like the client isn't always necessarily pleased. Like, you may finish the project, but it may not be what the client wants, or it may be that the software just simply can't deliver what the needs of the business. There are so many different ways to define failure. Apparently, failure can even be you get the project done, you get the deliverables, but it is way over budget. So technically, that's a failure, but you get the end result that you're looking for. So there's a lot of nuance there from my understanding. But
yeah, I'm glad you said that. I shouldn't have used the word failure. It's really it's not meeting the expected results.
Yeah, which is like impossible to achieve also. I mean, especially because I feel like people's understanding of the project changes even as they become more familiar with it. Their expectations of what it can do and their wishes and their wants and everything. There you get into scope creep and things like that. So it's very complicated, it seems.
And some of these, I came from the ERP software line originally, so I did financial systems. So how many ways do you want to process an order? How many, you'd be surprised, these SAPs, generate PeopleSoft, how many ways do you want to? Which one's the best one? Well, how do you want to do it? There isn't one a best way. There's better ways, but how do you want to process a sales order through the system? How does that feed financials? What is your chart of account? I mean, these are all questions, and if you make those decisions and later on you realize they weren't fitting the business, once again, not delivering the expectations, quote, you failed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I should have used the word fail, but yeah.
No, I don't even think you did. Or I think, well, we were talking about lessons learned. I think fail is the right word, but it's just, it's more common than I would have realized at least from what I'm reading.
I think what the lesson he was trying to convey to me in this conversation to kind of remind me of this is the context is really about managing expectations. So what is the lesson learned? You're going to fail because you did not deliver the level of expectations that you wanted, the leadership, the company wanted, and why.
Yeah.
So a good example is I suspected that if we did not bring your team in for the exclusions project when we did, I feared because that change was so drastic, and I don't know your team well enough. So I took a shot and said, and you agree that we should bring them in, get their input, let them see what's coming. So it's not just a welcome to the new process you're going to be following.
Yeah.
They deal with that data. They know all the weird nuances they have to deal with. Let's get that feedback in now. Let's vet the solution now before we get to that stage.
Right.
So we're delivering the expectations that we've set with them, and they have a voice. And from my team's perspective, we delivered a mechanism to make exclusions easier to build into all the reports and dashboards. It
Yeah.
also eliminated Jeff's requirements to handle some of the specialty things that he was concerned with data giving and directory services and the person on the ground. So there was things that, so people managing that expectation is the lesson learned. That's also the most complicated and challenging thing because
Yeah.
everybody has a different expectation.
Yeah. And it took a lot of buy-in and collaboration with Tim's team too, I mean, getting him to understand like why it was important to write all these reports. I mean, of course, he's an easygoing fella, but like sometimes it's easier to just keep things as they are. It can seem easier to just keep things the way that they are. But we ended up with a win-win solution all around.
Yeah, we implemented 5 automated exclusion rules now that basically that takes that pressure off Tim's team.
Yeah.
The last one we just put in, just so you know, is remember there's an exclusion for disaster areas like the wildfires and hurricanes.
Mhm.
That was a file managed on the outside that they had to go get for every list. Now it's one file, one table, runs every night and stamps those exclusion records. So now they don't have to worry about that. It's just part of the process.
Awesome.
Same way they do exclusions. One more thing is now in there. One more thing they don't have to remember to check for in every list they build.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so it's rippling through. That to me, it's exceeding my expectations of what I was hoping for the solution. Seeing people do seem happy, so I'm like, yes, we've managed the expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you do have some odd ones you do ask me about every often. Like, I don't know, that's a very odd request to get me off content, but yes.
Yeah, we do still get them, but I feel like 98% of all the weirdness is covered. So that's a win.
It's a win. We're always going to have those. Yet what? What are you trying to? Yeah, so that's going to happen. But that's kind of what I think that when I say failure, it's not delivering to the expectations or going longer than you really should have, going over budget, which is something that I consider higher risk because I never want to go back to a singular difference and say, hey, I need another X thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars because we ran over, unless we knew about that well in advance based on some other things. So they're already prepared for that scenario.
Yeah.
I never, that's for me a great risk having to go back for money. But in terms of lessons learned, yes, managing and delivering expectations.
Yeah.
You're not always going to be successful.
I'm going to add that really quickly. Okay, so what steps would you suggest I take now to better prepare myself for future project management?
Well, let me ask you a question. How do you learn? What type of learner are you? I think I know the answer to that question, but I want to see if I have deduced it correctly.
I think I'm similar to you in that I learn best when I'm playing around, but I have found that I think over the years I've learned that I like sort of high level sort of introduction of why, how. I mean, I guess I'm a typical freaking stakeholder in that I like the big picture. I like to know the end objective, and then I can sort of, I guess, emotionally, mentally, physically tie myself to like, okay, I need to get in here and actually learn the system because I'm not going to necessarily learn how to use what's the new thing?
Oh, Zendesk?
Zendesk. I'm not going to just learn it from an overview or a PowerPoint presentation, although I want that aspect. I need to get in there and kind of play around and not break things, but.
No, break it. It's trial version. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think
you can break it.
Is that what you would assume my learning style is?
That's what I'm trying to do to it.
Yeah.
So So yeah, so two things there. One, trial version. Yes, the whole purpose of that trial process is to evaluate and see, to learn some of it and see what we can do, as well as to understand what we potentially could buy.
Right.
Figure out as much as we know. So one, mitigate risks. Two, set the right expectations for when we ask to buy something. This is what it's going to do. Or when
Right.
team who's using it, this is what's going to be coming to help you manage this. So no more of this email tracking it down. It's all right here. You can kind of see where this process evolves into some of the same topics you're talking about
Yeah.
here. Is how I'm approaching that project. And typically with this type of solution, I typically do the exact same thing. I try to mitigate risks. I don't like buying software that fails to meet things later.
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate that hasn't really happened, but there's always a first time.
Yeah.
I'm
I,
not sure, well, everything is 100%. There's definitely a few out there like, we could have done better in this project. Um, in terms of how to prepare your next step. So first of all, you're already kind of doing that. You're already taking it. You took a change management course. Because these are now options out there, but I did not have as in school. I think the first steps you're taking are perfect. Understanding what this is, what is a project, what are the roles, understanding some of the common similarities, understand that how you do projects here at State versus, let's say, Pebble Hill or Duke or corporate, maybe
yeah.
totally different.
Right.
Uh, I was trained in one methodology from a big five accounting firm. That didn't translate well in the next corporation I worked for because they said that's just way too much overhead, way too much
Yeah.
project stuff. Okay, we scaled down. And you know where I came from, where we didn't really have project management. Well, I still had it, but wasn't really adopted more broadly. So for you, I think after the courses, if question is this something that you want to do on a more regular basis? Because if that's the case, then there's basically two options. One is, although I am not currently certified, that is my plan, is to finally get my certification. So I've been just kind of pushing off for so many years that I don't really need it because they keep making you do these jobs as a project
Yeah.
manager. But I'll get the credentials finally and say, okay, yes, I've done it. I've been doing it for almost many years. Let's leave it at that. Second piece is for you is that might be an option for you. And maybe not the PMPs. Maybe go with a CAPM level from the PMI Institute. Just
Yeah.
itself. So maybe that having that little bit of credentials certifies you that you've passed the exam. You know the terminology. You know the methodologies around project management and the different methodologies within that world. And also just to find people to chaperone, to mentor under, as well as raise that hand and say, I want to run that project. So for example, if this is something of interest to you, then why don't you run the Zendesk project? Or should we say the service queue project? And I become just a functional person, maybe the technical role in this one, where my job is to do what you tell me to do. No, partner with you, but you set the expectations. You meet with the executive wing. You meet with the directors to make sure that everything is structured and moving forward, so they understand what is to be expected.
That sounds wild. That's very generous of you and scary to offer. Um,
I'm right there.
it might be for this one, it might be more, and this is, I'm off the cusp, it might be more beneficial or helpful to me to sort of more actively follow this project with you as the lead through the lens of like, maybe I could do this next time, not with a help desk project, but with some other thing. Like, I mean, I assume at some point there's gonna be something else.
Oh, I think we are an organization ripe with project opportunities.
Yes. But I'm not opposed to that at all. You know, I feel like I feel like I do manage projects on a smaller scale within my team,
Mhm.
but I think that it would be helpful for this one to sort of think about it like, okay, Jason is running this project. Here's my role. Here's all these people's roles, and kind of think about it from a constructive perspective. To think like checkbox, like yeah, we did this. We Jason did the background to like mitigate risks, and we did involve the stakeholders early, and we did involve the project sponsor, Jeff, Karen, what have you, um, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. I know you can do it. To be honest, this project currently does not have a sponsor.
Right. Oh
So,
yeah.
so right now, this is what I would call discovery
Right.
project, because we might look at both vendors, maybe a third vendor, and say, none of these are great. Eh.
Right.
While it is a, let me rephrase that. It's a project in the sense of, this is how I kind of follow piloting method, my piloting approach. I look at solutions and say, does this work? I look at lots of different software packages. I forget all the different packages. A couple of them even come back around again saying, because I mentioned the name going, I think I looked at that already.
Yeah.
Because one is there a solution that would work? So like I said, Wes is fine with me taking the time to build a queue for you and play around the software to kind of figure out what we can do with these platforms.
Right.
There's going to be a point where it has to move out of discovery and into an actual project where, okay, is that going to be Karen as a director? That could qualify executive sponsor. It doesn't always have to be Jeff or whoever the head of our unit is.
Right.
It could be really any of the directors or higher up, I'd say. It could even be you in many cases too. But because this is a cross-unit system with you and the gift team, it probably needs to elevate up to Karen. So who can,
Agree.
then Jeff obviously would have to be more financial approving of that. I think that's how I'm not even sure how our unit works in terms of decision making like that. Still, it's a little, usually it was Kishal I always had to work with, but.
Yeah. Karen's supposed to be in charge of the budget, but I think that there's just a lot of gray area there, with all things in higher ed. I think there's always going to be a bit of gray area and checks and balances and back and forth. But what was I going to say?
Those things.
Um,
But that is my recommendation for you, is to get involved. If this is if this kind of activity is of interest, and to be honest, I see it happening all over the place, whether they're not maybe formalized projects with a project manager and a sponsor and the traditional, I forgot the agile terms, and have all those agile teams. We might move that direction. We're not really that structured currently, but if that's something of interest, those are some paths I would encourage you to. I know you can do it. Question, if you want to do it.
I definitely am interested in it, but one of the benefits I think of your role, and I'm getting off, going on a tangent here, but I feel like one of the real benefits of your role within your team and within our department is that you do have that time and that sort of, Wes gives you that sort of mental space and that sort of workload flexibility, I'll call it, to be able to kind of vet these programs and to spend more time. One of the pitfalls, I would say, of a lot of the things that I'm most interested in, so like training and development and project management and things like that, is that there's just not necessarily enough hours in the day because I'm middle management, so I'm managing 9 people and I'm managing their work and I'm managing their personalities. And I've talked to, I was just talking to someone about this just last week. It's like, I do, because it gives me value, have to carve out time for more interesting things. Like the stuff I'm doing with Wolfpack Philanthropy. Like I'm working a lot of after hours stuff to like work on charts for them and to come up with content and things, because it gives me joy. It's more fulfilling than the normal stuff I work on. But my 9-to-5 job is what pays my bills, and it's not forever. I'm not going to be in a middle management role forever, and so stuff like this and working with you on projects, it sort of gives me like that glimpse into like, okay, that could be like a way that I could pivot, that I could go. You know what I mean? But that's not to say that I shouldn't do project management and that I shouldn't lead projects and things. It's just, I worry sometimes about the time it takes to do it properly, because all the stuff we've been talking about scope creep and risk mitigation and things, it takes time, and you can't really have blinders on and be like, you have to be like listening and engaged. Does that make sense? Or
It is. Hmm?
Yeah.
But you are managing a project, and you mentioned it right there. I don't think you considered it a project.
What?
We were just talking about women in philanthropy, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's not what I consider a software development project. No,
Yeah.
but you can still apply a lot of those principles that you're learning about managing that group in terms of how to move that, not really move that group, how to organize that group into the committee that it is its vision to become, and have that impact of all of those extremely bright individuals to really drive this kind of change.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things you're learning, while it's not a quote project that you can build something from scratch, it kind of is. A committee never existed. Committee was now born. Committee now has members. You're now the chair. Are you the chairperson or?
No, but
Oh, okay.
I'm like the data manager
You're the
person
data manager.
for the team.
So I thought you were the head of it. So even in that role, maybe there's ways in which you could help the team as a whole organize and approach things in a more deliberate way. I don't really know how it's running. I truly don't know.
You are right. You are right. I mean, the data management aspect is an education in and of itself, and it's so connected to the work the data liaisons do. It's so connected to this engagement score, and it is a project in that you have to manage the way that they understand the importance of getting the data in, the way that they capture the data, the way that they see the data, the way they appreciate the data. But you're right, it's more abstract than like a concrete start and end project. But I hadn't thought about it. But
Yep. Well, and just take some of the reports that I've heard about. I don't know what's even on the reports. Is
oh, Wes and Tim probably hate me.
but that might be a way to kind of use a simple report as that could be as a start.
Yeah.
Reports typically do have end dates in terms of when development starts, but think about it, you don't need everything day one. Think, okay, guys, well, we definitely agreed that we need this much information. Let's put that in.
Yeah.
Now, communicate to Tim saying, hey, this is just a starting point. We're going to want to add more, but we want to see this kind of in a kind of a process, a creation process, and we continue to work through this. And that would be kind of the old days, I think it's a process improvement. So, okay, add some more columns, add some more calculations, maybe a dashboard, whatever this is going. And that can be a very small project.
Yeah.
To where I use the word project because it can be anything, but you're applying project principles to managing process.
Yeah.
Getting definitions. Well, what does this mean, team, when you say average gift? How do we currently define average gift? I don't know the answer to that question, by the way. That's one of the questions I have for tomorrow. Is what does that mean? How do we consistently use the same definitions so that on your report, average gift is calculating the same way as maybe the annual gift is, as well as whatever we're doing over here?
Right.
Making sure we use the same terminology so there's consistency across reports. Even though your group and group B over here probably never share the report, the underlying data is the same, just presented to fit whatever the committee is focused on, whatever B is focusing on.
Yeah.
So lots of opportunities.
So many.
So, like I said, we are a organization ripe for projects. Question is how do you prioritize them?
Yeah. And the answer currently is just like hot potato.
Yeah. But you are right. I am very fortunate to be in the role that I am, and having Wes, who is giving, who's encouraged me to really help with some of the changes. And most of the changes I've been working on are things that nobody sees except my team.
And
But they're
also,
starting to benefit from.
you have a unique set of skills and an inquisitive mind. I mean, you're just so perfectly situated for that team. Advancement Services is so lucky to have you. But
I've been in middle management. I've been in upper management. I've always missed middle management was the most difficult. Your role. You have people who expect things from you. You have your own expectations, and you have people above you with expectations. And trying to reconcile those three sets can be challenging.
yeah.
And being the further up you go, the further away you are away from some of the things. And I love working with the business side, the technical side, and being that conduit between navigating both worlds. You get to learn your business, get to learn the technical business, and try to keep all parties kind of on the same page. Well,
Yeah. You've found yourself in the right role.
Mm-hmm. I'm lucky.
Okay, just a few more questions. I'm so sorry we're going so much over. I
Fine,
will
I'm
try to
good.
keep
I'm
short
perfectly
these last
fine.
few. So it seems there are always new methods and approaches to project management coming out, such as agile, Scrum, Lean, etc. Do you think it is important to familiarize yourself with all these new types of project management in order to be successful as a PM, as a project manager?
To some degree, yes. I think there are always certifications. I have former colleagues who are Scrum masters, I think is the term they use.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it kind of comes down to understanding what those are and seeing if they are applicable to the, in my mind, this is me speaking, the culture of the organization. Now, granted, the organization you're in may be different tomorrow.
Yeah,
So being aware of what lean project management is and why is that different than Scrum, and
yeah,
why is Scrum different than Agile, or is it?
right,
Um, so being aware of that, deciding is it worth going down those paths? Yes, you should be aware of those things. That's actually what I'm doing now.
right.
I am not familiar with lean project management. I know the term, but not familiar with it.
Yeah. So basically, if I could summarize, it's like in the same way you familiarize yourself with tools to like mitigate risk, you familiarize yourself with these things in case they could be a better fit for the organization. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. So, how do you handle conflict or miscommunication with subject matter experts when working on a project?
I'm always right. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
That's easy. I'm always right. They're wrong.
don't
No,
worry about it.
no. Honestly, I don't. I haven't. I have to say, I'm very fortunate that conflict has never been an issue in my projects. In the broad scope of things, there's always, some people be having a bad day or something. But in terms of true conflict, I've been very fortunate not to have to deal with that too often. Um, I can only think of one incident where I'd consider that to be, is a long time ago, where there really was a conflict that I couldn't seem to get any common ground on by talking. And that required going to up the ladder to
Yeah.
address. But a lot of times for like miscommunications and misunderstandings is you just have them. I'm not afraid to say, hey, this is, um, they're subject matter experts for a reason. So if they're the ones who have the skill set, then I have to have some faith. Like, use you as an example. I have complete faith that you as a subject matter expert with all everything biographical that you will. I don't have any. This is a tough one to answer because it's if you have miscommunications, you just talk it out.
Yeah.
It's not personal. It's a business relationship in that regard. So we were in a project together. It's like, oh, totally misunderstood what you meant by what was the term skill-based routing. So I was asking about this. Well, we don't really have that, but events go here. I'm like, okay, not really skill-based. We don't really need those functions then. It's just making sure in having those conversations over and over again to help, once again, mitigate this. But if they are, just have a conversation. I'm not afraid to have those conversations. If the other person is a little bit more standoffish and doesn't want to, I'm hope that I can pick up on that. But there's a certain point where I'm going to have to be the bigger person and say, hey, Victoria, looks like we may have a disagreement on X, Y, Z. Love to hear why you think X, Y, Z is a good thing.
Yeah.
And just have those conversations. I've never really been in a situation where it is actual conflict.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a term that is maybe that term is just the wrong term to use, but miscommunication is probably a better word. You just talk it out.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of it. I'd rather get the solution right. Once again, mitigating the risk, delivering the right expectations so we don't fail in the project. So when it comes to my professional career, that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Is I'm always trying to communicate with you or anybody to understand kind of what we're working on. I don't want to surprise people.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to be surprised either. I hate surprises.
Yeah.
I'm former tech. We do not like surprises.
And do you not like surprises in real life either?
Not really, no.
Okay.
Yeah. My friends usually, my friends, even Meredith, will sometimes try to sneak up and try to scare me. And it's very hard to do. Yeah.
Too aware.
Is this something that hairs the back of my neck raise up as something is happening? Like, and I start looking around like, what's happening?
Yeah.
So it can happen, but it just, yeah, I'm not a person that likes surprises. Even in my personal life, I like things, I call the furnace people in the fall. They'll come in, take a look at the furnace. I don't want anything happening there. Yeah, I'm just one of those people. I try to mitigate the risk in my own life
Right. Makes sense.
so I can relax.
Yes.
Just guaranteed something's going to go wrong with the batch processing someplace, and I have to fix it. Or have Maxine fix it.
All right, this is the final question. What do you think is the most important skill in order to be a successful project manager? And it can be like more than one thing if it's not one skill.
Ironically, I would not consider this one of my strengths, but it is probably the most important, is really communications. Is a traditional project manager, or the person leading the group per se, is you have to be able to work in basically 3 completely different levels of the organization. So in my world, I have to work with functional experts such as yourself. I need to be able to communicate in your language to the best of my ability to understand what you do in your unit, how you guys do things. I have to and even that by itself has different people. On the other side, I have to talk with the technical folks. So these are your database people, your programmers, sometimes network. Now, in my role, security people now too, to understand in those terminologies. So I have to learn a whole different world. Well, security is a whole new world for me. The development world, I've been working that for a long time, so I'm pretty comfortable there. But dealing with that world, and especially at organizations such as ours, there's so many people with different skill sets. Who do I talk to what? And okay, guys, help me figure out who I got to talk to.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to facilitate that.
Centralized as well.
Yeah. And then you also have, sometimes, depends on the organization, you have to talk up the chain. So now you talk, as you've experienced talking to people like Brian, they think at a very different, I kind of call it the macro level. Their questions are very leading or very inquisitive. And we're so used to dealing with what I'll call the ones and zeros, or the ins and outs of the process, and they start asking questions at a very different level.
Yeah.
And it's something that it's not that we can't, we have different responsibilities while they're steering, I say steering the organization. We're trying to make sure, I'm using a boat analogy, feed the furnace, fill the sails, making sure the water gets pumped out, making sure other crews move along. We're trying to make sure the boat moves. They're trying to figure out what path to take, and they're asking questions. We're like, we've been shoveling coal. I don't know what you're asking.
We've been shoveling coal. Love that.
Make this work. So I'm not sure where you're going.
Yeah.
And those frame of
reference. I don't know if there's an iceberg ahead.
Exactly. Oh, great, Titanic. We seen around the Titanic? But that is an area where, as a project manager, is a very tough place to be.
Yeah.
And a place that I struggle with.
I think you're really good at it, but I think, we're our own worst critics, but I feel like a little bit of respect and diplomacy and organization goes a long way, and you have those 3 things in spades. And and you're also very good at documentation, which I think is an important part of communication. All of those things could be considered separate skills, but really they are like communication toolbox,
The documentation is my crutch.
Yeah.
Because 6 days from now, I won't remember what we did.
Right.
I can barely remember what I had for breakfast.
Right.
What did I have for breakfast? Oh, cereal. What did I have? Because my brain has already rolled onto about 4 other things since this. So unfortunately, that is how my brain works. So be careful of how you learn how this thing works. Wes has gotten a full dose of it. But talking in those three worlds is very different. And I'll admit, I have difficulty talking at that executive level.
Yeah, I do too.
Um, Part of it is I don't have a lot of practice at that. Even when I was kind of approaching that level, I still spoke to, I could strategize, I came up with 5-year plan. I mean, I got all that, but you're no longer doing the work. And
Yeah.
that's when I came back. It's like, I want to do this. I don't, it's someone else with that.
Yeah.
Just that's not where I excel at. I excel at the other. I think I do well with groups, functional groups and technical groups, but the executive level I struggle with. And it's because I don't talk with them regularly, or any other
Whereas,
level.
don't you think it seems like it comes so naturally to Jeff? It seems like it does.
I think he is very versed in that. And he
Yeah,
does a
that's
lot of
probably what it is.
now, especially now as the intern.
Yeah. It's
But no,
like it's so funny to me to see so many of my peers and just like I've picked up on like Jeff follow like kind of doing some of your presentation and communication things and but it's like he needs how do I say this? I feel like at this very minute our team is like a very highly functioning department in that we have leadership that understands the nuts and bolts of the system, but that are well versed and able to like communicate and they have the trust of upper leadership. And I feel like that really situates all of us to do better work and to not like live in fear. And anyways, I'm just riffing, but I feel similar to you. I'm better at the work and conceptualizing and thinking about it and sharing that vision with someone like Karen. I mean, for better or worse, like she's very comfortable speaking in front of people.
I've
And
noticed that.
yeah, and so she really does benefit more from like having me compile something for her or like brainstorm with her or like give something to her and like hand it over like here's the baby and then she's good and whereas I still get nervous like for data liaison meetings. But
I had no idea you were even nervous that last one you had me at. I'm like, really?
well that's good because I was shaking.
Couldn't tell. Could not tell.
Thank you. But anyway,
That's a good point. This public speaking is a big part of a project manager role.
yeah.
Has never been one of my strengths. I mean, team meetings or small groups, I think I'm better at, but when you have to give more of a formal presentation, I become exceptionally nervous and I will speak extremely fast if I don't remind myself mentally to slow down.
Yeah.
No more
That
coffee for
surprises me. It seems like it does come naturally to you, but I guess I do see you in more of like the small leadership groups.
Small groups, yeah. So I feel more comfortable, and usually I know everybody at the table. I become much more. Depends on the audience. I become, but I'm also one of those individuals that will process the information later. Give me a chance to digest, figure it out, rip it apart, and that's probably why I'm an analyst. Is how my brain works? Is I will take that and try to figure 10 different ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
Which never stops sometimes.
Yeah. Into the night.
Hey, Wes, I have an idea. How many? Only 7? You get 2. But that's how I operate, though. So like I said, so the more important skill is how do you communicate 7 different ideas in a way that the audience is going to convey? How do you take this exclusion management and assume that Brian would be interested in that type of solution? How do I convey that in terms he can understand? Which is, that level is probably at the most 1 slide, maybe 4 or 5 points. That's it.
Yeah.
Why was it significant? That level, they're not interested in how you get it to work. What's the benefit?
Yeah, why should I care?
Like engagement score, how are we going to use that? I assume that's probably the nature of where he was thinking of how is that going to drive
You're
our
absolutely right.
portfolios in our
He said,
events.
"Don't show me how the filters work." He was, I mean, this is all being recorded, but only on this computer. He he was a bit like to the anthology iModules representative, and to the point where I was like,
Very direct. Not surprising.
yeah. And to that end, I mean, I think Jeff and many thought that they would want to see that level of detail, but they were like, I don't need to see the filters. It looks like there's a million different ways to slice this data. Like, what I want are recommendations for where we should focus first.
Yeah. How am I going to use those numbers, whatever those numbers mean? How are my fundraisers going to use this to make more money?
Yep.
How is your event team going to drive more participation?
Exactly.
What's the value of this that we just spent X dollars for?
Yep. You're exactly right.
And then he's going to remember that. And he'll ask that question 6 months. So has the numbers gone up in these categories? How are the teams using this feature now?
Yeah. What benefit is it actually bringing to this thing that we're refreshing every 6 months? Like, what's it actually doing? What purpose is it serving? But anyways,
in a 4-minute conversation.
What? In a 4-minute?
Because I'm thinking his mind is I could be meeting a major donor right now.
Yeah.
Or dealing with something that the chancellor wants or something like that.
Right.
Many more things I'm sure is already going through his mind.
Yes. So thank you so much, Jason. That's all the questions I have for you. Interesting that you said communication, because that is supposedly the most important project management skill. And I do think you're very good at it, but like I said, we're all our own worst critics. But so I'm gonna write all this up for myself, and I'm gonna listen to it and transcribe it, and then write a paper on your interview. So thank you.
Well, thanks for thinking of me for this project. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's no one else that I work with that would be the right fit other than you. I mean, I would need to go outside of maybe Tara or Margaret, but I feel like it would be more of a stretch. Like, you really do manage projects, but I don't know. I'm
thinking like maybe Adam too, because he's had a lot.
Yeah.
And things. He might be also a person. Yeah, I mean, I work the way I work. Yeah, I mean, we all have it, but it's something of in terms of more of a very more focused. But yeah, I'd probably,
You'd pick you too?
Myself, no. A former colleague of mine up in New England, she works for 3M now. She is I think the term is a Scrum Master.
Yeah.
So she went through the certification process. So in your shoes, depends upon if I want to reach out, is one, I'm curious as to what that means.
Yeah.
So already I'm kind of thinking, what does that mean? Well, what does it require? How do you apply that at 3M? More now for personal growth questions, here are the other 7 questions that I have on top of my interview questions in terms of how that would apply. How could I make that apply here? Would that be something I'd be interested in pursuing myself to apply here?
Is 3M a ERP company?
No, what company?
Wait, is it ERP?
No.
Like financial management, like HR, financial. Isn't it called ERP?
ERP is Enterprise Resource Planning, is what the acronym stands for.
Okay.
Companies that are ERPs would be like, well, the major ones, the big players would be like SAP, Microsoft, Lawson, Oracle. There used to be more, but they've all seemed to be acquired. Now, after that, you get into some smaller tiers. Different industries have different ones and things. But those are the major ones. I actually did PeopleSoft and JD Edwards were my 2 I actually did. I was one of those dual roles back in the day. 3M is Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. It's a global conglomerate based in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Okay.
I think it has its own, we joke, it has its own zip code. The company I worked for was acquired by 3M. Okay. So some of us went elsewhere. Some stayed in, moved around. I think her background is actually graphic design. She was beautiful, an artist that created a lot of our content and stuff for the firm I work for. But seeing that on her is like, whoa, what is that? What are you doing? And they have a Six Sigma practice, and people, that's all they do is Six Sigma practice implementations and things, along with all the project management and things of that nature too. So it's a massive global corporation that owns a lot. Post-its, for example, is one of the gazillion products they have.
Oh, lucky them.
They invented it. So, but yeah. So, well, thanks for thinking about me for this. I appreciate that. I hope this was helpful.
It was very helpful. I'm going to stop recording, and it's not recording anymore, but I don't know how to save it.
My site still says it's recording.
It still says it is?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, it does on mine as well.